Hi, my name is Briana Pegado, and I'm chair of YWCA Scotland, the Young Women's Movement, one of the oldest feminist organisations in Scotland that's been around for over 100 years. I'm the youngest chair of the board in the organisation's history, and currently I work as co-director of an organisation called We Are Here Scotland, which is a community interest company set up by our founder, Aika Headlam in Aberdeen, to support Black, Indigenous, people of colour creatives across Scotland. Until recently, I was the creative director of Fringe of Colour Films, a film festival set up by our founder, Jess Bruff, who was working to support Black people and people of colour in the creative industries that were not getting enough opportunities or visibility in the Edinburgh Fringe Festival or other summer festivals throughout August. I formerly was the executive director of Creative Edinburgh, which is one of the oldest and largest creative networks in Scotland that supports creative people in the creative industries at any stage of their career across Scotland, working in Scotland, in the UK, and internationally. And I'm the founder of the Edinburgh Student Arts Festival, which was a festival I set up in 2014 while I was president of Edinburgh University Students Association to support young people in Edinburgh, but across Scotland, who are facing barriers to the arts and creative industries. It was a festival that was free at first and very low fee to enter to enable people to showcase their work across different parts of the creative industries, from film to dance to performing arts to the visual arts to crafts, and also creative ideas through workshops and talks. We also ran a creative partner series that partnered with organisations across Edinburgh and Scotland that supported young people to better understand the opportunities they had to enter the creative industries and what sorts of jobs and apprenticeships they could take on that would allow them to work in a creative industry where they were paid better than, say, an artist or a creative that was at the centre stage of their creative practice. Now, I say all of this to you because often in my career, I've been the first and the only. I was the first Black woman to be elected president of Edinburgh University Students Association in its 130-year history. And I'm not saying this to you to impress you or to rattle off my qualifications or legitimacy to address you today. It's to say that often as the first, the only, and the youngest in the room, I'm faced with a lot of pushback, whether or not that's prejudice due to my age, my gender, my race, or my nationality, though I've been in Scotland for the entirety of my adult life and entirety of my career. I've seen what's happened in a creative industries that's the fastest growing in the UK, and that brings in so much revenue but opportunity to a country that I feel could be going through its second enlightenment. When we actually break down what I mean by the creative industries, I'm not talking about theatrical performances and fringe festivals and great productions or even works of visual art. I'm talking about the data-driven innovations that are taking place in an industry that's been pushing boundaries since the beginning of its start and beginning of time in a lot of ways. When we think about what creativity means, being resilient, dealing with uncertainty, thinking out of the box, using limited resources, and being able to see patterns, ideas, and systems that not everyone else can see. Artists and people in the creative sector and cultural sector have always been able to hold up a mirror to us as a society to comment on what's going right or what indeed might be going wrong. When we look at the biggest crises facing us, including the climate crisis, shifts in kind of societal beliefs around capitalism and democracy, when we look at the geopolitical landscape of our world with the rise in certain powers globally and internationally, the rise in technology, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, and also, indeed, when we look at the changes that are taking place in the public's trust in our government, governance structures, and who indeed is in charge, I think the creative industries hold the power and have the many answers we need to come together to work collaboratively, to problem solve, and to co-design, as in design our futures together. Now, I say this coming from a background in sustainable development from the University of Edinburgh and spending so much time in Scotland deciding to make it my home because I saw the incredible confluence and coming together of data, technology, the creative industries, and our incredible third sector, which has been leading the way in purpose-driven business and alternative business models for the last 20 years. We have the Melting Pot, one of the oldest hubs for social innovation here in Edinburgh. We have an impact summit run by FutureX. We have so many social enterprises that have been pushing the boundaries around what it means to run businesses and organizations that think about more than profit. And we have a well-established third sector of charities and not-for-profit organizations doing great work. All of this is really positive, but what does this mean about the status of young women in Scotland? Well, I can tell you a couple of things from my own experience. Even though I've set up my own social enterprises and been in incredible positions of power, from being on the National Partnership for Culture, which was set up by our former Cabinet Secretary for Culture, Fiona Hislop. I was the only young woman in that room, the only person of colour, potentially one of the only queer people in that room. And I tell you that anytime I said anything that mentioned the precarity of work in the arts and creative industries, the number of people self-employed, employed and freelance, my ideas were often challenged or cast away. Now, I understand we have a lot of institutions established in the arts and culture sector in Scotland, from Creative Scotland to established museums and galleries, to Historic Environment Scotland, to so many actors and players in the arts and creative industries. But increasingly, they're run by people that are out of touch with the arts and creative industries as it is today and as it's growing, and the needs of people in it. We've just lived through a pandemic that has slashed the income of the majority of people in the arts and creative industries by about 70%. And not only is there a problem in terms of financial income for people in the arts and creative industries, I remember a few years ago sitting at a cross-party group for culture meeting when there was a presentation that shared the median income of people working in the arts and culture sector is £12,000 a year. Now, median is important to highlight because if I gave you the average, that would be skewed by the number of people with 6- and 7-figure jobs who work in creative industries businesses that are like unicorns and giants, unicorns being the term we use for really successful startups. But that would completely skew the figures where it's the majority of the people in the arts and creative industries are living in work poverty, cannot work full time on their creative practice. They're often working in hospitality or tourism or other industries to make ends meet. I myself, though I've been in roles that have been incredibly well paid at times, have lived in poverty and lived on the brink and lived in my overdraft and been stressed and worried about how I'm going to make my rent the next month. And this is 7 or 8 years into the industry. And though I can be viewed as someone that's early career, that's still really problematic when you think about the median income of people in the arts and creative industries, and yet how fast it's growing and how many businesses and arts organizations are doing incredibly well. So there's a real inequality in terms of income across the industry. Also, the way it's valued by the public. People are happy to pay for a cinema ticket, but expect, for example, certain things to be free. Art galleries or, even an artist or designer making a logo or doing a graphic design are always questioned when they're given their fee and their rate. I'm not saying that art shouldn't be made for art's sake, but in terms of people really understanding the skill, craft, expertise, and time that goes into a lot of different pieces of work and roles and skills in the creative industries, that's widely not understood by the public. When we look at how much arts education has been slashed by the UK government and schools, when we look at the fact that a lot of people in the arts and creative industries are not unionized and there's very little structure available to hold boards of organizations accountable for their behavior, or even to have HR support within the arts and creative industries when so many people are working independently and working freelance or as self-employed. I'd like to share a couple of stats from our recent Status of Young Women in Scotland report that we published last month that's looking at work for young women in the arts. It says that because of the pandemic, 1 in 12 young women were made redundant, 40% did not feel secure in their current work, and 60% had to change their career plans. We also found that 25% of young women felt they were not supported at all by their employer to look after their mental health. Our report looks at the precarity of work, looks at the status of young women in work, so 49% are in a full-time job, but 10% were self-employed with part-time work, 7% unemployed looking for employment, and 2% were self-employed or freelance based on our data pool of young women we interviewed for our Status of Young Women in Scotland report. I also want to highlight a report that came out in 2018 called Panic 2018, It's an Arts Emergency, which was a study done by the Universities of Edinburgh and Sheffield looking at the inequalities in the cultural workforce as well as the program of recommendations they'd like to make. They found that only 4.2% of BAME workers were in film, TV, and radio, 2.7% of BAME workers in museums, galleries, and libraries across the UK, and 4.8% of BAME workers in music and performing arts. People from working class origins, that was 12.4% in film, TV, and radio, 18.2% in music, performing, and visual arts, and 12.6% in publishing. When it came to a gender balance, women were overrepresented in those sectors, but we didn't look at, and that report didn't look at, the status of young women in those stats, but we can see what that might be. I'd just like to close this provocation by saying, I'm a young woman who's made my career in the arts and creative industries and I've loved it. But it's not a career that I'll continue in the arts and creative industries. My experiences of abuse of power, lack of accountability, cronyism of pals, partners, and friends, all running arts organizations across Scotland, all knowing each other, all coming from the same age group, not doing the right thing when they've been encountered with issues like sexual harassment and assault, racism, ageism, abuses of power. We've got a sector that structurally is not designed in a way that supports young women or people from any diverse background, to be fair. And I know this isn't just the arts and creative industries. We actually need some more systems in place to look at how do we hold one another accountable, and why do we keep funding arts councils that are not representative of the public, that have chief executives that can constantly have to resign due to making poor funding decisions, and that have arts institutions that have boards of people that are made up of people from the private sector that have great skills and expertise, but don't necessarily understand the needs of the sector and creative industries in which they govern. I personally am tired and really fed up with my experiences in the arts and creative industries in Scotland, and I don't want any young women to go through what I've been through in my 7.5 years working in the arts and creative industries. What I have to ask you today is, what are you going to do to make sure our arts and creative industries are not only thriving and pushing us forward in terms of ideas, innovation, and economic value, but how do we make sure our arts and creative industries are inclusive of young women from a plethora of backgrounds in order to ensure that the future we're building is truly innovative, is truly sustainable, and is truly fair? Thanks for your time today.